this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
It's an Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan. Tonight, 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
The big game commercials are basically must-see TV. This year, Elf Cosmetics went all out with an absurdly funny telenovela called Melissa. It stars Melissa McCarthy, Nicholas Gonzalez, Itati Cantoral, and Elf Glow Reviver Lip Oil. The Elf Glow Reviver Lip Oil is an ultra-glossy tinted lip oil that nourishes, hydrates, and enhances your lips' natural color.
Watch the full episode of their new Elf novela on soyunbaño.com.
Ever wonder why so many people regain weight after stopping a GLP-1? Up to 40% of the weight lost can come from lean muscle. This weakens the body, slows metabolism, and makes it easier to put the pounds back on, creating a cycle of dependency. Prolon's 5-day fasting-mimicking diet offers a drug-free way to maintain results and support long-term metabolic health. In just 5 days, it activates fasting pathways to burn fat, protect muscle, and rejuvenate cells, all while letting you enjoy real food. Get 15% off plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe at prolonlife.com/iHeart. That's prolonlife.com/iHeart.
You see it instantly. It's Coldwater Creek, the mark of exceptional workmanship and signature touches inspired by a Mountain West heritage. Distinctive styles created from quality fabrics, silhouettes perfected with just the right drape, feel-good fits offering ease of movement, and thoughtful details to elevate your look. Coldwater Creek's authenticity is embodied in every piece, embracing its confident spirit that carries through to today. Discover Coldwater Creek clothing, designed to fit your life the way you want. For a wardrobe you can count on season after season, visit coldwatercreek.com. Shop the new spring collection at 20% off $75 or more with code IHEART20.
Welcome to One Thing Trump Did, available exclusively on the Middle podcast feed. I'm Jeremy Hobson. Each week on this podcast, we are looking at one thing coming from the Trump administration, because there's so much, and in a nonpartisan way, just like on the Middle, we try to learn as much as we can about it. In this episode, we're focusing on drug cartels, and more specifically, Trump's move to designate a handful of these criminal enterprises as terrorist organizations. An executive order labeled 8 Latin American cartels as posing the same national security threat as, say, ISIS does. President Trump spoke about the need to wage war on these groups in his address to Congress last month.
The territory to the immediate south of our border is now dominated entirely by criminal cartels that murder, rape, torture, and exercise total control. They have total control over a whole nation, posing a grave threat to our national security. The cartels are waging war on America, and it's time for America to wage war on the cartels, which we are doing.
So what are the implications of this? Joining me now is someone who's spent a lot of time covering both drug cartels and their impacts here in the United States, journalist and author Sam Quinones. Sam, great to have you on.
Thanks very much for having me. Appreciate it, Jeremy.
So let's first define our terms. When we say cartels, what are we talking about? How big are they? How much do we know about the cartels and how they're run?
Well, that has actually changed quite a bit in the last several years in Mexico. I lived in Mexico for 10 years. And when I was there, what people called cartels, there were really just 4 of them. They were very well defined. There was the Tijuana cartel, the Adriano Felix cartel, the Sinaloa cartel, which controlled the Arizona, Sonora entryway. There was the Juarez cartel that controlled Juarez, El Paso. And there was the Gulf cartel, which controlled a lot of the Texas, Mexico, down by the Gulf of Mexico. There's really, the dust has settled to some degree. And so you have really 2 now that dominate the landscape out of Mexico. First, the oldest, best known Sinaloa cartel, formed really around Sinaloa, and then the other one is Nueva Generación, Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación, the new generation cartel. They emerged in the state of Jalisco, which is where Guadalajara is located, really around the production of methamphetamine, and has now become much larger than that and much more stable in cartel terms anyway. I would say this, though, that the term cartel is also not exactly precise. If you study economics, cartels are groups of producers who combine.
They work together.
They work together to force the price up. Mm-hmm. And both these groups now have transitioned, I'd say, fully to producing synthetic drugs. So it is not technically like OPEC. Remember OPEC in the 70s came together and controlled the production of oil to force the price up. With drugs, particularly those two synthetic drugs, we have seen exactly the opposite. The drug production is so vast, so really uncontrolled, that the price, certainly of methamphetamine, fentanyl is a harder thing to price, but with methamphetamine, we have pricing history pretty much across the country, and we have seen clearly that methamphetamine's price has dropped by, I would say, 80 to 90%, depending on where you are, since Mexican cartels have taken over basic production all in Mexico of that drug.
Well, and just like OPEC, the organizations we're talking about are in it to make money. That makes me wonder about this designation as terrorist organizations. Terrorists we think of as organizations or people who have a political or an ideological aim. That is not the case with these cartels.
No, I'd say that's true, that there is no essential political motivation or central ideological tenet. They are capitalists, mafia capitalists, basically underworld capitalists. I think the designation of foreign terrorist groups, though, doesn't come from their ideology. It comes from the effect that they are having in the United States of the products that they are making. And with that, you are right, that there is not a central ideological motivation to any of this. It's all money and getting a larger territory and kind of competing with your rivals and so on from other groups and even within the same cartel. But the effect on the United States has been devastating, and considering that it comes from one general area, it's really a different kind of effect, because these two groups have covered the country in methamphetamine and fentanyl. And that is really unprecedented too. Now, they are able to do that because they have made that switch to synthetic drugs, meaning drugs made only with chemicals that they make themselves with ingredients, again, from elsewhere, mostly from China. But these ingredients allow them, as synthetic drugs, allow them to make these drugs all year round if you have the ingredients, and the ingredients they're able to get through shipping ports into Mexico, mostly ingredients coming from China. And so what has happened is they have really, in a way unprecedented in the history of drug use in America, covered the entire country.
So how much responsibility would you put on them for the fentanyl deaths in particular that we've seen in the U.S.? There were 87,000 overdose deaths last year, which was down from the previous year, but still very high. And most of those deaths attributed to opioids like fentanyl.
I would say that they have very great culpability for all of that. They are producing a drug that should be only used very carefully and in minute doses in surgery by trained anesthesiologists. Fentanyl in the hands of people who, like them, is just simply devastating. Frequently synthetics, particularly in the potency and the relentless nature of so much of this stuff, are about supply creating demand. It's not really so much about demand creating supply. They have created the supply down there, and it is coming through, and it is addicting people. Fentanyl in particular is that way because it's put into lots of drugs that people think they're using cocaine. They think they're using a Percocet, and it turns out to be fentanyl. But it's also gets a lot of people addicted. I would say most of the people using fentanyl on the street now are fully addicted to fentanyl, need fentanyl, and are looking for fentanyl.
But if the cartels are business people and they're killing some of their customer base, isn't that a pressure point for them? Or I could also ask, is it if the Trump administration is so angry about this that they are ready to potentially use military action on the cartels within Mexico, is that something where they say, oh, you know what, we probably should stop with the fentanyl because look at what it's doing to us?
Well, you would think. I would say that some of that's probably true. On the other hand, again, these are not cartels in the same way that OPEC was. This is not the Microsoft of dope. This is not the United Airlines or the GM of dope. There is no group up top saying, let's do this, let's do that. We need to plant. No, they've made attempts at doing that. It doesn't seem to work. Most of the time when it comes to production, you are doing it on your own. And no one's telling you can't do this, or it's really a function of how many chemical ingredients you can get and how much you produce. And right now, and for the last numerous years, I would say, they have been able to get an enormous quantities, all but unlimited quantities of ingredients for the meth, for the fentanyl that they make. All of this, of course, ensured by the weapons that they are able to smuggle from the United States south into Mexico, mostly assault-type weapons and, of course, ammunition and all the rest.
So now we're hearing about the possibility that the Trump administration would use drone strikes, for example, on these organizations, on these cartels. How would that work?
That's a great question. How would it work? How would it go over in Mexico? How would it be viewed internationally? I don't think it's ever been tried, and I don't know. And you'd have to be pretty certain that you weren't bombing somebody who was legitimate, law-abiding organization or
an American
farmer,
citizen who's in Mexico.
Because a lot of these labs are out in the middle of the countryside. So how does that all work? I think that's an excellent question. I think we'd all be watching to see what effects and after effects would have.
Well, and of course, it would have effects on the U.S. relationship with Mexico, one of our largest trading partners. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. Stay with us. We're speaking with journalist and author Sam Quinones. We'll be right back with One Thing Trump Did.
Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan. Tonight, 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
You see it instantly. It's Cold Water Creek, the mark of exceptional workmanship and signature touches inspired by a Mountain West heritage. Distinctive styles created from quality fabrics, silhouettes perfected with just the right drape, feel-good fits offering ease of movement, and thoughtful details to elevate your look. Coldwater Creek's authenticity is embodied in every piece, embracing its confident spirit that carries through to today. Discover Coldwater Creek clothing, designed to fit your life the way you want. For a wardrobe you can count on season after season, visit coldwatercreek.com. Shop the new spring collection at 20% off $75 or more with code IHEART20.
Welcome to the A Building. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba. It's 1969. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. had both been assassinated, and Black America was at a breaking point. Rioting and protests broke out on an unprecedented scale.
In Atlanta, Georgia, at Martin's alma mater, Morehouse College, the students had their own protest. It featured two prominent figures in Black history, Martin Luther King Sr. and a young student, Samuel L. Jackson.
to be in what we really thought was a revolution. I mean, people were dying.
1968, the murder of Dr. King, which traumatized everyone.
The FBI had a role in the murder of a Black Panther leader in Chicago.
This story is about protest. It echoes in today's world far more than it should, and it will blow your mind.
Listen to The A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Ryder Strong, and I have a new podcast called The Red Weather.
It was many and many a year ago in a kingdom by the sea.
In 1995, my neighbor, Anna Trainer, disappeared from a commune.
It was hard to wrap your head around. It was nature and trees and praying and drugs.
So no, I am not your guru.
And back then, I lied to my parents, I lied to police, I lied to everybody.
There were years, Ryder, where I could not say your name.
I've decided to go back to my hometown in Northern California, interview my friends, family, talk to police, journalists, whomever I can, to try to find out what actually happened.
Isn't it a little bit weird that they obsess over hippies in the woods and not the obvious boyfriend?
They have had this case for 30 years.
I'll teach you sons of bitch, come around here with my wife. Boom, boom.
This is The Red Weather. Listen to The Red Weather on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to One Thing Trump Did, exclusively on the Middle podcast feed. I'm Jeremy Hobson. This episode, we're talking about the Trump administration's move to designate a number of drug cartels as terrorist organizations. I'm speaking with author and journalist Sam Quinones. Sam, Mexico's president has, since Trump came in, been willing to cooperate and allow more surveillance by the CIA, for example, of the cartels. But here's what she said about the potential for military action by the U.S. inside Mexico. Quote, "We reject any form of intervention or interference. That's been very clear. Mexico coordinates and collaborates, but does not subordinate itself. There's no interference, nor will there be." What do you think it would mean for the relationship between the U.S. and Mexico and further cooperation by Mexico if the U.S. were to say, we are going to, drop a bomb from a drone on one of the cartels?
Well, let me first say that I have great hope in President Sheinbaum's new administration. It already has shown itself to be much better in when it comes to collaboration on this issue than the previous administration of Andrés Manuel López Obrador. However, to say Mexico collaborates and cooperates, that has not been seen in any sustained, deep, sustained way. In certainly the last administration did very little of it when it comes to this topic, I have to say. And so I appreciate that she is very leery and upset of the idea of having Mexican territory essentially bombed by American drones. I would say, however, Mexico has a very long way to go to gain the trust of the United States, or I'd say the world, in terms of how it deals with the drug issue. I would say we have our own problems as a country, the United States. One of the big ones being, of course, the wanton sale of assault weapons that are now smuggled into Mexico. That is a very big deal. But I don't see the history of collaboration and cooperation on the part of the Mexican government in general. Certain elements certainly have, but overall, I would say that one of the problems that we face is that Mexico has not really offered the kind of collaboration and cooperation that it should. And when it does, for example, in busting meth labs, in my last book, The Least of Us, I wrote about the Mexican government had busted somehow something like 300 meth labs and not arrested one single person. Not arrest 300 meth labs, and somehow every one of them was empty when they got there. That kind of thing doesn't do much.
Why is that? Why is that? Is that just because it's
because
such
of
an important part of the
collaboration
economy?
with the underworld?
Yeah.
The people who were tipped off ahead. I mean, the collaboration was really with the underworld, not with the United States on this. I'm not saying that we are blame free here in this, obviously, but I really have to push back when I hear, we collaborate and cooperate. No. I'm sorry, that has not happened in the past, and anytime it has, it's been very short-lived and hasn't lived beyond the one administration to the next. There needs to be this kind of sustained collaboration between the two countries. Again, we have our own issues, But that kind of statement, and I wish I have high hopes for her administration, and I really hope it goes well. And it couldn't be any. Really, she has a very low bar to clear because the last administration was dismal on this topic.
Do you think that this is more of a threat from the Trump administration or something that they would actually do?
I think it would be much better if it were a threat. I think as soon as you start doing these things, as soon as you impose tariffs as a threat to get people to do something about fentanyl, you lose the leverage. I think, and I think, yes, drone strikes, I think should always be used as a threat. There should be constant prodding. There should be as well. It seems to me that we need to show Mexico that we are serious about the flow of guns into their country. It's outrageous the numbers of guns that flow south, and how these traffickers have been able to get away with arming themselves. If they're foreign terrorists, why are we arming them? Why do we not have major units at each border crossing into Mexico, checking cars, making sure, for cash too, huge amounts of cash, because it's cash and guns that go south. The drugs come north. And so I think that kind of collaboration would also go a long way to showing Mexico that it's really time now to modernize. Up to now, it's been like the remnants of the old Mexico, the corrupt, the Mexico behind the sunglasses, and I think it's time to move beyond that. Mexican people, the American people have just suffered because of this enormously. But I have to say too, Mexicans have been just beaten down by these awful cartel groups that seem to just have the run of certain areas of the country.
One of the things that comes up every time people talk about this issue is the idea that what if America were to legalize more things, then maybe you could crush the industry, the underground industry. I wonder on that front, how has the legalization of marijuana in the U.S., which more than half the states now have it legalized, affected the drug cartels?
Well, I would say that marijuana is no longer a drug for the Mexican drug cartels. That's one of the reasons they have moved more fully into synthetics. On the other hand, in the United States, we have a whole lot of underground illegal marijuana, including in states where it's made legally. And we that's a whole other discussion to have marijuana, because I think we have botched it massively. What marijuana feels to me like is like the beginnings of the opioid epidemic, and that we have basically turned over to the producers and people who profit from this substance the same way we did with opioids, turned over the statutes and what's legal and what's not legal, what they can do and what they can't do with regard to producing and selling this stuff. And then there is no limits on potency. We don't know what we're doing when it comes to legalizing this stuff. And marijuana is now being sold in, I'd say, just scary potency, and it's affecting kids all across the country. I mean, that's a whole other discussion to have. But I would say one thing it has done is that marijuana is really not a drug for the trafficking world in Mexico anymore. Any more than poppies are either. I mean, it's all about making your drugs, not growing your drugs down in Mexico right now.
Yeah, we did an entire episode taking calls about whether marijuana legalization was working, and the very things you're talking about were brought up, whether it is how much more potent they are, sometimes 90% compared to like 3% if you were smoking a joint back in like 1985. And then also the packaging for kids, like making these things look like they're candy. So that was a very interesting episode.
we were upset when Camel cigarettes fashioned Joe Camel ads aimed at kids, but gummy bears, apparently that's okay.
Right. So on the issue of sort of what the Trump administration is calling this terrorist organizations, I wonder what you think about the labeling of it that way, because we know that they are very interested in the messaging, in the PR of how immigration and the border are being talked about. And the idea that if you call these groups terrorist organizations, then you can say we're arresting a bunch of terrorists coming in at the border.
Yeah, I look at that as kind of a political move, I guess, more than anything. The way I view this is that technically they are not terrorists. You will not find no manifesto, no religious, ideological, political doctrine motivating people in the new generation or the Sinaloa cartel at all. It's all about the money, end of story. Just like the mafia, the Italian mob in the Northeast of the United States was. The effect is kind of like a terrorist might have, though, in two ways. Just the mass death, but also the chronic debilitating effect of people who get addicted to these drugs. Again, I believe that this is more a story nowadays about supply in enormous quantities, enormous potency, unrelenting quantities, creating addiction, among people who had no real plan to get to that state. And many of those folks die. And many of those folks now, you can see them on the streets, homeless encampments and whatnot. And I believe all these two drugs are major drivers behind mental illness and behind the death rate and behind the rates of addiction. We did this to ourselves in some sense because, again, referring to my first book, Dreamland, on the opioid epidemic, we allowed for the pharmaceutical industry to create massive numbers of opioid-addicted Americans who were not addicted to those drugs before the opioid epidemic began, and they began promoting it and pushing doctors to wantonly prescribe these drugs. Those folks, if they were addicted when fentanyl arrived on the scene wherever they lived, they were addicted to pills or heroin, it's very, very likely if they did not get off the street that they are now dead. And what you've been seeing now, the people lately, I would say in the last 5 years, you've seen people who have gotten addicted without pills being, the painkiller pills being involved at all. And so you've got this whole new world of people addicted who are then going to die. There is really, I don't think if you don't get people off the street and into treatment, I think it's very high likelihood those people will not live long. There's no such thing as a long-term fentanyl addict, and that's because fentanyl coming out of Mexico is just in staggering, relentless, high-potency quantities.
So what are people that you talk to, your sources, telling you about what they think of the Trump administration plan to label the cartels as terrorist organizations? Do they think this is, what a good idea, this might actually make a big difference, or this is
I would say that it depends who you are. People in law enforcement tend to look at it as a good idea. I think people in the drug counseling world, certainly drug addicted world, I would say those folks barely think about it. It's not a big deal. I would say some people view it as some folks in the drug counseling world who, in my view, may look at this in a way that does not fully correspond to the reality on the streets, may view it as, a terrible thing. I tend to view it as kind of, okay, but I guess it depends on what you do with that. And I see, it feels to me far, far more productive to be working with a new Mexican administration where the president's shown herself to be willing to move forward on this and on other issues than on immediately just kind of like, scorched earth policy and screw it. Nobody's ever collaborated with us from Mexico, so they're not going to do it now. I don't think that's what's going on here now. So I think it would be very counterproductive. Tariffs, high tariffs. I would say definitely drone strikes would be a counterproductive. I think it's far, far better. This needs to be a binational approach. Law enforcement on both sides and other groups too, other parts of government need to be heavily involved in this on both sides. And the extent to which we can push that forward so that it is not just a one-time thing, but it is sustainable across administrations, the much better off we will all be, both in Mexico and in the United States.
Sam Quinones, let me just ask you one more question. In my life as a journalist, I've worked in Washington, covered politics, where you can usually find a way to get the person on the phone that you need. I've been on Wall Street, where it's much harder because the businesses don't have to talk to you if they don't want to. How in the world do you find out what's going on with the cartels? I mean, do you get like blindfolded and put in the back of a van or anything like that, or how does it work?
No, I'm a coward. I don't go that route. Well, rarely. First of all, you talk to a few groups of types of people. I find that on the streets of the United States, you can find some wonderful, wonderful sources. And I do not refer so often to people who are, roaming the streets, addicted to whatever. I think better sources are local cops, paramedics, ER docs, folks like that, people who have seen this, who see this every single day. I also, in the past, when I've been writing my books, I have reached out heavily, as I always have for years, to people who are in prison. And you'd be surprised how often people in prison are willing to talk with you from prison. And then, of course, there's law enforcement. There's cops. There's DEA. There's prosecutors, very good. Sometimes probation, parole, folks like that. You can, if you talk to people and triangulate and work in maybe people in the same area or whatever, or from the same case, you can put together quite a bit. For my Dreamland book, I think I quoted, can't remember right now, but I think I quoted 8 or 10 Mexican drug traffickers, all of whom were in prison when I contacted them.
Interesting.
Prison and jail, federal prison in particular in the United States is the depository of, I'd say, massive amounts of numbers of Mexican traffickers, from the top guys down to the lowliest soldier. And I think that is a wonderful place to find information. It's not as hard as you would think, although sometimes the wardens of these prisons stand in your way. I think it's a huge, huge mistake for them to do that. There are journalists out there trying to tell the story of drugs in America coming from Mexico. And sometimes, as in my case, I've been blocked a couple of times from wardens who, well, I don't like journalists, so forget you,
Right.
Well, so anyway, that's kind of how I do it. I find jail and prison much better for a couple of reasons. First of all, you know where they are, and so you can find them easily. Number two, it's safe. And number three, it's also very interesting, is people who are in prison have thought more deeply about their lives, of what they've done to their lives or with their lives. And that can really be a very interesting thing to talk about with a guy like that. And that has happened to me several times, many a time, I would say. Gang members, too, are very much like that. And so finding people in prison prison is where I like to find folks for all the reasons that make total sense from a journalist's point of view.
That is Sam Quinones, author and journalist who has spent years covering the Mexican drug cartels. Sam, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And thanks to you for listening to One Thing Trump Did. It was produced by Harrison Patino. Our next middle episode will be in your podcast feed later this week. We're talking about the economy with former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers. And if you like this podcast, rate it wherever you get your podcasts and write a review. Our theme music was composed by Noah Haidu. I'm Jeremy Hobson. Talk to you soon.
You see it instantly. It's Coldwater Creek, the mark of exceptional workmanship and signature touches inspired by a Mountain West heritage. Distinctive styles created from quality fabrics, silhouettes perfected with just the right drape, feel-good fits offering ease of movement, and thoughtful details to elevate your look. Coldwater Creek's authenticity is embodied in every piece, embracing its confident spirit that carries through to today. Discover Coldwater Creek clothing, designed to fit your life the way you want. For a wardrobe you can count on season after season, visit coldwatercreek.com. Shop the new spring collection at 20% off $75 or more with code IHEART20.
Over the last couple years, didn't we learn that the folding chair was invented by Black people because of what happened in Alabama?
The Montgomery Brawl.
This Black History Month, the podcast Selective Ignorance with Mandy B unpacks Black history and culture with comedy, clarity, and conversations that shake the status quo. The Crown Act in New York was signed in July of 2019, and that is a bill that was passed to prohibit discrimination based on hairstyles associated with race. To hear this and more, listen to Selective Ignorance with Mandy B from the Black Effect Podcast Network on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
1969. Malcolm and Martin are gone. America is in crisis. And at Morehouse College, the students make their move.
These students, including a young Samuel L. Jackson, locked up the members of the Board of Trustees, including Martin Luther King Sr. It's the true story of protest and rebellion in Black American history that you'll never forget. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba.
Listen to The A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
14 years in prison for killing a young woman. A 15-year sentence for a crash that caused 3 deaths. 12 and a half years for killing a child and critically injuring her mother. All true stories, all caused by marijuana-impaired drivers. No matter what you tell yourself, if you feel different, you drive different. So, if you're high, just don't drive. Brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.